ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
I'm Julia Baird.
And I'm Jeremy Fernandez.
And we wanted to talk to you about our podcast. It's called Not Stupid. We chat about the news that's in our feeds and grabbing our attention.
And this week, the fires in California have been all over social media, but so has the misinformation. There was a fake video about the Hollywood sign burning down, and lots of claims and counterclaims about funding and water.
So how do we work out what's true? And is it getting harder to figure it out? You can find Not Stupid on the ABC Listen app.
The Australian dollar is at its lowest level against the US dollar in 5 years. That hurts us if we're holidaying there, but some economists think it also means the Reserve Bank should hold off on cutting interest rates. Our chief business correspondent, Ian Verrender, doesn't agree. Today he explains why rate cuts should still be on the table. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Ian, what is going on with the Australian dollar? No sooner do you book a trip overseas and down it goes, right?
Yeah, that's right, Sam. So that's your Christmas present and your New Year's resolution all wrapped up into one. Don't go away anywhere.
Exactly.
Look, the Aussie dollar has fallen quite substantially against the American dollar, and it's interesting. It's really the only measure that we take, and I guess that's fair enough because the American dollar is the world's reserve currency, and pretty much everything is priced against the US dollar. All the other currencies are priced against it, commodities are priced against it, bonds, everything, and so we look at the sharp drop down to 61, well under 62 at least anyway, to the lowest level in 5 years this week, and everybody's there, gnashing their teeth and all concerned and worried. But the problem is that this is not really a story about weakness of the Australian dollar. It's really about the strength of the American dollar. There's, the euro, the pound. The pound has fallen really sharply against the US dollar. The yen, everything is down against the US dollar. So that's really what that's all about. And if you want to know the reason for the strength of the US dollar, well, Donald Trump's election and his absolute promise that he was going to hit the world with tariffs, and particularly China, has rattled every economist around the world, and everyone's decided, well, this is possibly going to be quite inflationary for America. And as a result of that, most of the expectations about rate cuts in America have been wiped for this year. So that means higher interest rates in America for longer, and that would mean that you're going to see a very strong US dollar as a result of that.
All right, so what we're going to do with you is unpack whether or not this low Australian dollar is going to have an impact on interest rates. And, well, Ian, you think the Reserve Bank is driving, this is an analogy, of course, like a bit of a hoon right now. So just explain that thinking.
Now, the analogy I made was, well, it is a little bit like you're in traffic and you see somebody absolutely roar past you with their foot flat to the floor on the accelerator, and then just before they hit a wall or hit a car in front, they slam on the brakes. There's no subtlety whatsoever in the driving, and they have been really reluctant to trim interest rates at all. And I would have thought that a central bank, having seen that our economy has slowed to not just a crawl, I mean, we're really barely above, in positive territory when it comes to economic growth. On any measure that you look at, the economy is not in great shape. The only area where we're doing well, and the rest of the world is as well, is with jobs. And jobs have remained very strong. So that's one of the, for the past, I guess, year or so, a lot of big name economists have been out there saying we've got too many people working. This is a sign the economy is too strong to cut interest rates. And now the latest fear is, the Aussie dollar is falling against the American dollar. That's going to be inflationary, so we can't cut interest rates.
Warren Hogan is the chief economist at Judo Bank. Good morning, Warren.
In my opinion, the case for a rate cut is very weak, and this currency development of the last few months makes it even weaker. In fact, it's dangerous because we're looking to sort of put some pressure on the RBA to cut rates when we haven't got rid of the inflation problem yet. So I think they'd be best just to sit back and watch. I don't think there's going to be a rate cut. I don't think it's the right economic policy for the country right now.
If your focus is on inflation, and inflation is coming down at a pretty rapid clip, I'm not saying you should cut them to zero, but you know, one or two, trims off the top might be helpful.
So just explain that a bit further though, Ian. Explain why a low Australian dollar is then inflationary.
So here's how it works. When the Aussie dollar falls, it makes our exports far cheaper. So we become suddenly far more competitive against other exporters around the world. And so more money flows into the country because when we convert what we're selling it back into Aussie dollars, we're getting a lot more Australian dollars for it. So that's really very helpful. The other helpful thing it does is that because the currency has fallen, it makes imports much more expensive. And so local producers, factory owners and people who produce things here will have a much easier time competing against far more expensive imports. So that's a great thing for local producers. The downside is that what we were just talking about then, imports become a lot more expensive. And we do rely a lot on imports because our manufacturing base has really shrunk over the past 30 years or so. And so that can be an inflationary impact.
Right. So the Reserve Bank could be worried that because the Australian dollar has gone down, that could be inflationary, so it might decide to hold off on dropping rates.
Yeah. Now, that's the textbook explanation of what goes on. In reality, though, it takes a very long period before an adjustment is made. So the textbook would suggest that because import prices have either gone, through the roof or through the floor, that you're automatically going to shift your pricing. It just doesn't work that way in reality. And so because the Aussie dollar has moved against the US dollar now and it's dropped, it hasn't dropped against the other currencies, though. And so there's no reason to suggest that it's going to have any kind of immediate impact on inflation here now.
Okay, so let's come back to interest rates in just a moment, because you've mentioned the impact that America is having on our dollar and what's going on in the United States. But China plays a big role here too, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah. I mean, look, we are so joined at the hip when it comes to the Chinese economy. It's our biggest export destination, and it's also our biggest, that's where we buy most of our manufactured goods from as well. So we have one of the least diversified trading relationships of any major country in the world. And as a result of that, a lot of speculators, they like to use the Australian dollar as a proxy for, trading the Chinese economy, because we are so, inextricably tied to them. And so if they think that the Chinese economy is going to be continually weakened, they will sell the Aussie dollar as a result of that. And of course, what we've seen over the past 4 to 5 years is that property downturn in China has really spread through the entire economy. I mean, there is now deflation running through the Chinese economy at the moment. So there's quite a bit of currency trading that pushes the Aussie dollar down as a result of that. But I mean, obviously, we are so tied to China that if China's economy does, continue to slow, that has a material impact on our economy, and so the dollar should weaken as well. And we have, incredibly devalued even against the Chinese yuan.
So how low can the Australian dollar go? Is it still on the way down?
It would appear so. I mean, it's really hard to pick. You know, it was only a couple of months ago that people were suggesting that the Aussie dollar was going to go through 70 cents, and then it was, you know, skyward for the next year.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you know, it all turned. So these things can change very, very rapidly. And, you know, because there is quite a lot of speculation involved as well, it really depends on what happens with the US dollar, I guess, you know. If Donald Trump, you know, doesn't introduce all the tariffs, or the tariffs aren't to the same extent that he was talking about before. I mean, he was talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. If that doesn't happen, then there's going to be a reassessment and a realignment in the US dollar. But if he does proceed with what he's threatened in the last 6 to 12 months, we will see the Australian dollar under pressure against the US dollar.
But that might take a while to play out, right?
It could do, yeah.
So does that mean, like, if it takes 6 months, 12 months for Donald Trump to implement any of this, does that mean our dollar stays low for all of that time?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you know, if the Chinese economy does, you know, plateau and start to improve a little, that will improve our currency as well. But, you know, if you look at the Australian dollar against the yen, for instance, now back in late 2019, just before the pandemic, I was in Japan and I was getting 72 yen to the dollar. If you went there today, you'd get 97, right? So we are much stronger against the yen now than we were back then. If you look at the Aussie dollar against the euro before the pandemic, well, almost. I mean, we're a little bit lower, I think, but we're almost equal. The pound, we're a little bit lower again, but nothing to really, you know, set the alarm bells ringing.
Yeah. So American tourists here.
Oh, they're cleaning up at the moment. I mean,
I was going to say, what a life.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Gosh.
American tourists anywhere, really.
Yes.
They've just, I don't know, they've struck it lucky.
They'll be fine dining, that's for sure. Lucky them. All right. So, look, Ian, let's go back to rates then, because there are some economists that are suggesting that because the dollar is so low and that inflationary pressure, that the RBA should really hold off in reducing rates. Now, there's a meeting next month. So what do you think it will do?
Look, Lucy Ellis, who was an assistant governor of the Reserve Bank until fairly recently, she's now the chief economist at Westpac, did an interesting little note the other day where she suggested, look, you'd need to get a 10% decline, or if you got a 10% decline in the Aussie dollar, that would equate to around about a 1% inflationary move. And then she said, but it would have to be a sustained change over a very long period of time before that shift in inflation actually occurred. So she was essentially writing off this whole argument that because the dollar's suddenly fallen, the Reserve Bank needs to hold off on any rate cut. And I mean, she does come from a fairly exalted position when you think about where she's previously worked. So I think, you know, there's certainly ample room for the Reserve Bank to cut at the moment. I think everyone is just waiting for some kind of relief at the moment. So I just can't see why they couldn't or shouldn't cut. Now, the market pricing at the moment is that there is a 75% chance of a cut next month. And a couple of big economists from the major banks are also suggesting that now is the time to do it.
Ian Verrender is the ABC's chief business correspondent. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Cara Jensen-McKinnon. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.